Go 1 week without a single grain of salt. No salt in your food, none in your body. You won't just feel tired. Your muscles will start failing. Your brain will start misfiring. And eventually, you'll die. Now imagine living somewhere on Earth where salt didn't exist naturally at all. That was real life for entire ancient populations. So how did they survive? And why does craving salt still feel so irresistible to you today? Here's the thing nobody thinks about when they reach for the shaker. Salt isn't seasoning. Salt is the reason your nerves fire. It's the reason your muscles contract. It's the reason your brain can send a signal from one cell to another without short-circuiting. Sodium, the salt part of salt, is one of the most fundamental chemical requirements for a functioning nervous system. Not helpful, not nice to have. Required. Your body doesn't produce it on its own. You have to get it from somewhere outside yourself every single day, or the whole system starts to fail. And here's where it gets genuinely brutal. Without enough salt, your cells can't maintain the electrical balance they need to function. Your blood pressure drops. Your heart starts struggling. Confusion sets in. Seizures. Coma. Death. Not from starvation, not from thirst. From the simple absence of a mineral you can buy for less than $1 at any grocery store today. For most of human history, that mineral was one of the rarest, most fought-over substances on the planet. Let's go back, way back. Before agriculture, before cities, before anything resembling civilization, early humans got their sodium mostly from meat, blood, organ tissue, fresh kills. These are naturally salty, and a diet heavy in animal protein will usually cover your sodium needs without you ever touching a mineral deposit. This is part of why some hunter-gatherer populations studied by anthropologists show almost no deliberate salt-seeking behavior at all. If you're eating enough meat, salt finds you. But then agriculture happened, and everything changed. Around 10,000 years ago, as humans shifted toward farming grains, vegetables, and dairy, something quietly catastrophic happened to the human sodium supply. Plant foods are naturally low in sodium. Genuinely, dramatically low. A population that shifts from a meat-heavy diet to a grain-heavy diet doesn't just change what it eats. It opens up a biological deficit that has to be filled from somewhere else. And that somewhere else became one of the defining obsessions of human civilization. Now let's talk about where ancient humans actually found salt, because the answer is stranger and more resourceful than you'd expect. In some places, nature basically handed it to you. Natural salt licks, exposed mineral deposits where animals gather to lick the ground, were used by both animals and early humans for tens of thousands of years. Archaeological sites near salt licks in places like Central Europe show repeated human activity going back deep into prehistory. People followed the animals followed the salt. Humans figured out the pattern and moved in. Coastal populations had it slightly easier, at least in theory. Seawater is roughly 3.5% salt, which sounds unimpressive until you realize that evaporating seawater in shallow pools, letting the sun and wind do the work, leaves behind a crust of usable salt. This technique, solar evaporation, was independently discovered by coastal cultures on nearly every continent. Simple in concept, brutally labor-intensive in practice. You needed the right climate, the right amount of sun, weeks of patience, and enough surplus labor that people could spend their time evaporating puddles instead of gathering food. Inland populations had it much harder. If you didn't live near the coast, and you didn't live near a natural salt lick, your options collapsed to exactly one: find underground deposits and dig. And ancient humans did. Some of the oldest deep mining operations ever discovered on Earth weren't for gold or copper. They were for salt. At Hallstatt in the mountains of what's now Austria, archaeologists have found evidence of salt mining going back roughly 7,000 years. Not a shallow scrape at the surface. Real mining, with wooden tools, underground galleries, and organized labor extending hundreds of feet into the mountain. The site was so significant that an entire prehistoric culture, the Hallstatt culture, spanning much of early Iron Age Europe, is named after it. A salt mine gave its name to an entire era of European prehistory. Let that sink in for a second. In China, by the time of the Han Dynasty roughly 2,000 years ago, engineers at Zigong were drilling salt brine wells over 1,000 feet deep using bamboo drilling technology that wouldn't be matched in the Western world for over 1,000 years. They used natural gas, tapped from underground pockets alongside the brine, to fuel the evaporation furnaces that turned the brine into usable salt. This is not primitive extraction. This is industrial-scale engineering built entirely around the demand for one mineral. Now, let's talk about what happened once humans figured out how to actually get consistent salt, because this is where things stop being about survival and start being about power. Salt doesn't just keep your body running. Salt preserves food. And before refrigeration, before canning, before any modern method of keeping meat and fish from rotting, salt was, functionally, humanity's only reliable long-term food preservation technology. Pack meat in salt, and the salt draws out the moisture bacteria need to survive. Fish that would rot in days could last for months. For coastal and inland populations alike, salt wasn't just a mineral you needed inside your body. It was the technology that let you survive winter, survive bad hunting seasons, survive drought years when fresh food simply wasn't available. Think about what that actually means. A population with reliable access to salt could store food across seasons. A population without it couldn't. That single difference could be the line between a community that survived a hard winter and one that didn't. Salt wasn't a luxury good. It was infrastructure, the same way fire was infrastructure, the same way a reliable water source was infrastructure. And whoever controlled it controlled something that every single person, every single day, genuinely could not live without. Which brings us to trade. And this is where salt stops being a survival story and becomes an economic one. Because salt deposits aren't evenly distributed across the planet, and because every human population needed it regardless of where they lived, salt became one of the earliest and most consistent drivers of long-distance trade in human history. The Via Salaria, literally the Salt Road, ran from the Adriatic coast into ancient Rome, carrying salt inland for centuries before Rome was even an empire. Roman soldiers were sometimes paid partly in salt, and the word salary comes directly from the Latin word for salt, sal. Your paycheck, linguistically, is a fossil of an economy built around a mineral people would once travel weeks to obtain. Across the Sahara, salt caravans carried massive slabs mined at places like Taghaza across hundreds of miles of open desert to trade in cities like Timbuktu, where salt was, for long stretches of history, worth its weight in gold. Not a figure of speech, an actual, literal, one-to-one exchange rate in some periods and locations. Caravans of hundreds of camels, weeks of travel, brutal desert conditions, all to move a white rock from one side of a continent to the other, because on the other side, people would trade equal weight in gold to have it. And where there's something that valuable, there's always someone trying to control it, tax it, or fight over it. Governments figured out early that salt was the perfect thing to tax. Everyone needed it. Nobody could avoid buying it. Unlike luxury goods that only the wealthy purchased, a salt tax hit every single household, which made it an extraordinarily efficient, if deeply unpopular, source of state revenue. In France, the gabelle, a centuries-long salt tax, became one of the most hated policies of the pre-revolutionary monarchy, enforced with such severity that salt smuggling became a genuine criminal underground, complete with smugglers, informants, and brutal punishments for evasion. Historians consider the gabelle one of the contributing grievances that helped fuel the French Revolution. A tax on a mineral your body cannot survive without help topple a monarchy. In India, centuries later, salt became a symbol of an entirely different kind of resistance. When the British colonial government imposed strict control and taxation over salt production, Mahatma Gandhi organized the salt